The whole thread. Episode 2. The what? The playbook, the mechanism. I want to show you something. Not a theory. Not an opinion. A document. This document was found in 1982 in a suitcase with a false bottom at an Italian airport. The woman carrying it was the daughter of a man named Lico Gelli, the Grand Master of a secret lodge called P2, operating inside the Italian government, the military, the judiciary, and the press. The document has a title, Piano di Rinascita Democratica, which translates to the Plan for Democratic Rebirth. The playbook. It was written in 1975. It entered the official record of the Italian Parliament. You can look it up. Document 23. Page 611 to 625. Italian Parliamentary Record. This episode is about that document. The playbook. Not just what it said. Why they chose each target. What each institution actually does for human beings. And what it looks like when that function is replaced from the inside. But before we go there, I need to tell you something important. 1975 is not the beginning. 1975 is when someone wrote it down. The infrastructure this document describes, the private clubs, the banking architecture, the intelligence networks, the coordinated media, was already built and running when Gelli put pen to paper. 1910. Jekyll Island. 7 men, representing roughly a quarter of the world's wealth, meet in secret to design what becomes the Federal Reserve. The financial control layer goes in. 1913, the Federal Reserve Act passes. The money mechanism is now law. 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations is founded. The Coordination Club is operational. 1942, the OSS is created. America's first centralized intelligence operation. The personnel roster reads like a who's who of Wall Street. 1947, the CIA is created. The OSS becomes CIA. The intelligence to media pipeline now has an institutional home. 1954, the first Bilderberg meeting. International coordination goes live. 1073, the Trilateral Commission. David Rockefeller publishes a report saying democracy has become ungovernable and requires management. In his own words, in his own report. 1975, Gelli writes it down. What you are looking at in this document is not a plan being launched. It is someone codifying what was already working into a transferable operational blueprint. A franchise manual for a restaurant that already had locations running. The deeper story? Who built each of those layers, how the money moved, who the specific people were. That is what the whole thread series is here to show you. Each piece gets its own episode. The who, the what, the when, the where, the how. Then we circle back to the why. We are going to walk through all of it. This episode is the mechanism. The what, the playbook itself. So you know what you are looking at when we get to the receipts. 1975 is where the blueprint was written. 2026 is where you are standing inside the finished building, where we are right now. Before we go point by point, I need to explain something. The Democratic Rebirth Plan is not a list of enemies. It is a list of load-bearing walls. Every institution on this list exists because human beings, at some point in history, needed it. The press existed to tell people what was actually happening. Unions existed because workers had no protection against being worked to death for nothing. Courts existed because powerful people were buying outcomes, and someone had to stop them. Political parties existed to translate the will of the population into governance. That is what these institutions were built to do. A plan to capture society doesn't go after its weaknesses. It goes after its strengths. It goes after the things that, if they were working correctly, would make the plan impossible. That is why these 8 targets were chosen. Not randomly. Not opportunistically. Because each one, if left intact, would stop the plan in its tracks. The document is organized as a project plan. Objectives, procedures, programs, budget. 30 to 40 billion lira. Enough, it states, to place controlled individuals in key positions across press, unions, and parties. Here are the 8 targets, in the order the document lists them. And after each one, why that target? Why that institution specifically? The list. The document is organized as a project plan with objectives, procedures, programs, and a budget. 30 to 40 billion lira. Enough, it states, to place controlled individuals in key positions across press, unions, and parties. Here are the 8 targets. In the order the document lists them. And after each one, why that target? Why that institution specifically? Target 1. The press. The plan said, purchase journalists individually. Compartmentalized. No journalist knows about the others. Coordinate through a small chain of handlers. Not newspapers. Journalists. People. Why the press first? Because information is not just one industry. Information is the precondition for every other industry functioning correctly. A doctor who doesn't know what a drug does can't treat a patient. A voter who doesn't know what a candidate has done can't make a real choice. A worker who doesn't know their rights can't exercise them. Control the information environment first, and everything else moves in the dark. The press is not target 1 because it is the most glamorous target. It is target 1 because it is the only institution that could expose what happens to all the other institutions. If the press is captured before anything else is moved, there is no alarm system. The plan said, by journalists. Individuals. Compartmentalized. No one knows about the others. In 1975, the same year this document was written, the United States Senate Church Committee documented exactly that operation, Operation Mockingbird. At least 400 journalists. At least 25 major organizations. CIA Director Colby confirmed to Congress, we had assets in every major media organization in the United States. That is sworn congressional testimony. Church Committee, Final Report, 1976. Primary source. Same year, same method, same structure. The plan said buy journalists. Someone was already buying journalists. 2026. 6 corporations own 90% of all media consumed in the United States. In 1983, that number was 50 companies. The consolidation that began with the FCC Fairness Doctrine elimination in 1987. Using, as the plan specified, the language of liberty and free speech, produced a media landscape where the outlets look different, but the ownership does not. The shell of the press remains. The function informing the public has been replaced with the function of managing the public's perception. Step 1. Check. Target 2. The unions. The plan said, provoke internal splits. Use financial tools to flip the most pliable members. Strip unions of political power. Reduce them to workplace administration only. Why the unions? Because unions are the only mechanism in a capitalist economy through which people who have nothing but their labor can accumulate enough collective power to negotiate with people who have capital. One worker cannot negotiate with a corporation. 10,000 workers who are willing to stop working simultaneously can. That is the entire mechanism. It is simple. It is the only leverage working people have ever had. A plan to consolidate economic control cannot coexist with functional unions. Not because unions are radical. Because they work. Because they are the documented mechanism through which the 40-hour week, the weekend, child labor laws, and workplace safety regulations were achieved. Every one of those things was taken, not given. The plan said, don't ban them. Strip their financial power. Reduce them to administration. Make them unable to act politically. August 5th, 1981. President Reagan fires 11,359 air traffic controllers for going on strike. Not suspends. Not negotiates. Fires. Permanently. Bans them from federal employment for life. This is the most documented single turning point in American labor history. It was a message to every union in the country. Strike, and this is what happens. Union membership as a percentage of the American workforce. 35% in the 1950s. 20% by 1983. .os. 10% by 2021. Later I see. That is not a trend. That is a documented outcome of a documented policy. 2026. Right to work legislation, which defunds unions by prohibiting mandatory membership fees, exists in 27 states. The mechanism is exactly what the plan specified, not outlawing unions, making them financially unable to act. The weekend still exists. The 40-hour week still technically exists. But the mechanism that produced and defended those things has been stripped of the power to defend anything. Step 2. Check. Target 3. The political parties. The plan said, find specific individuals in each party. Fund them sufficiently to acquire internal dominance. If the parties are too far gone, create two new movements, one left and one right, using pragmatic language with no ideology. Make them look new. Why the parties? Because in a democratic system, political parties are the translation layer between what the population wants and what the government does. They are the mechanism through which 330 million people's preferences become policy. If you control who rises inside the parties, you control what policies are even available for voters to choose between. The election becomes real in every visible way. The ballot, the campaign, the debate, the count, die. But the candidates on both sides of the ballot were already selected before the public ever voted. The plan specified two methods. Method 1. Fund individuals inside existing parties to rise to dominance. Method 2. If the parties are too discredited, create new movements that look fresh, use pragmatic language, have no fixed ideology. Left and right, give people the feeling of a new option. January 21st, 2010. Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission. The Supreme Court rules that corporations and outside groups can spend unlimited money in elections. Unlimited. No cap. No disclosure required in all cases. That is case 558, U.S. 310. The Supreme Court's own opinion. The mechanism the plan described, financial instruments sufficient to place controlled individuals in dominant party positions, was made constitutionally protected. And the second piece. In 1998, someone asked Lico Gelli directly about Berlusconi, a media billionaire who had built a political movement from scratch, absorbed left and right factions, used his private television empire as its engine. Gelli said, on the record, "They are copying my plan piece by piece. Maybe I should have the copyright." He was not talking only about Italy. 2026. Both major American political parties have approval ratings below 40%. Multiple new political movements have launched in the last decade using exactly the language the plan specified: pragmatic, non-ideological, presenting as alternatives to a broken system. The financial infrastructure behind all of them traces to a small number of the same donors. Step 3. Check. Target 4. The judiciary. The plan said, a moderate faction already holds 40% of judges. Make programmatic agreements with them. Provide material aid. Use them to rapidly adjust legislation. Why the judiciary? Because courts are the last line of defense between what the powerful want to do and what the law actually permits. Everything else on this list, captured press, defunded unions, controlled parties, can eventually be undone through democratic process. The courts are what prevent you from being able to undo them. If you control the judiciary, you control what laws mean. You control which rights exist in practice, not just on paper. You control what evidence gets suppressed, which prosecutions proceed, which corporate mergers get approved. You control the permanent architecture of what is and isn't legal, independent of elections. Federal judges serve for life. A judiciary built over decades cannot be changed in a single election. It is the slowest moving and most permanent target on the list, which is why it requires the longest lead time. 1982. The same year this document became public in Italy. A group of law students and professors at Yale and the University of Chicago founded an organization to build a long-term pipeline of ideologically vetted judges into the federal judiciary. They called it the Federalist Society. By 2020, all 6 conservative Supreme Court justices had documented Federalist Society connections. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked 112 judicial nominations in a single Senate term, holding those seats open for Federalist Society-approved replacements. That is in Senate confirmation records. The Federalist Society was founded the year the plan went public. In the country the plan described expanding into. 2026. The Supreme Court has issued rulings expanding presidential immunity, restricting voting rights, eliminating administrative agency independence, and overturning 50-year-old precedents. Every major ruling moved in the same direction. Consolidate power upward. Reduce democratic accountability downward. Step 4. Check. Target 5. The government structure. The plan said, restructure ministries, reduce legislative oversight, consolidate executive power. Make it so the executive cannot be removed except through elections. Ministers appointed by the executive alone. Why government structure? Because the separation of powers is the only mechanism that prevents any single person or faction from controlling the entire apparatus of the state simultaneously. The legislature writes the laws. The executive enforces them. The judiciary interprets them. Each branch is supposed to check the others, consolidate executive power sufficiently, and the other two branches become ceremonial. The legislature can pass laws the executive ignores or refuses to fund. The judiciary can rule against the executive, but only if the executive respects the ruling. The plan's specific language, the executive cannot be removed except through elections. Ministers appointed by the executive alone. No independent agency. No independent prosecution. Everything flows through and answers to one office. The unitary executive theory, the legal doctrine that the president has complete and unreviewable control over all executive branch agencies, has been developed in Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel memoranda since 1986. It is explicitly advanced in Federalist Society literature. In 2023, the Heritage Foundation published a 900-page governing blueprint called Mandate for Leadership. It calls for bringing all federal prosecutors under direct presidential control, eliminating the independent status of the FTC, FCC, SEC, and EPA, placing every regulatory function under direct executive authority. That is a public document, available online. They published it themselves. 2026, the executive branch has moved to fire independent inspectors general across agencies simultaneously, assert direct control over independent regulatory bodies, and challenge the authority of courts to review executive decisions. Each of these moves is a specific implementation of the specific restructuring the plan described. Step 5. Check. Target 6. Public broadcasting. The plan said, dissolve state public broadcasting, not through direct attack, but through constitutional free speech arguments. Use the language of liberty to remove the infrastructure of it. Why public broadcasting, specifically? Because public broadcasting is the only media infrastructure that is structurally required to serve the public interest rather than a private owner's interest. A private network answers to its shareholders. A public broadcaster, by its charter, answers to the public it serves. You cannot buy a public broadcaster the way you buy a private one. You cannot install a sympathetic owner. You cannot threaten to pull advertising. The funding structure removes the leverage points, so you don't attack it directly. You use the language of the people who built it. You call it government bias. You call it a free speech issue. You say, why should taxpayers fund a viewpoint they disagree with? You use the vocabulary of liberty, the same vocabulary the founding documents used, and you point it at the one institution that was built to resist private capture. 1987, the FCC Fairness Doctrine, which required broadcast licensees to cover controversial issues from multiple perspectives, is eliminated. The argument used: First Amendment, freedom of speech, the language of liberty. Written in 1975, executed in 1987, exact mechanism specified. 2026. The federal budget included elimination of the corporation for public broadcasting entirely. Every defunding campaign since Reagan has used the same framing. The language is identical. It has been identical for 50 years because the plan was written once and executed continuously. Step 6. Check. Target 7. The Constitution. The plan said, medium and long term, amend it so the executive cannot be removed except through elections. Legislative power divided and reduced. This is the slowest target. The capstone. Why the Constitution? Because a constitution is the document that defines what kind of power is even possible. It is not a law. It is the rules about what kinds of laws can exist. It is the architecture within which everything else operates. The plan understood something important. You don't need to formally amend a constitution to functionally change what it means. You need to control the courts that interpret it, the agencies that enforce it, and the legislators who fund it. Do all three, and the document stays the same, while everything it was meant to protect disappears. This is why the judiciary target and the government structure target precede the constitutional target in the plan. You build the interpretive apparatus first. Then the Constitution means what you need it to mean. 2026, the Supreme Court has ruled that a sitting president has broad immunity from criminal prosecution for official act. The definition of what constitutes an official act, and who decides, is now being litigated. The text of the Constitution has not changed. What it means in practice is being rewritten in real time. Step 7. Check. Target 8. The private club. The plan said, maximum 30 to 40 members. Business, finance, law. Select judges. Select politicians. Morally unimpeachable in public. This club oversees the politicians who implement the plan, and one thing must happen immediately: establish connection with international Freemasonry. Why a private club? Because everything else on this list requires coordination. Someone has to know which journalist is working which angle. Someone has to know which judge is available for which ruling. Someone has to ensure that the union funding in Wisconsin is coordinated with the media coverage in Ohio and the party funding in Arizona. You cannot coordinate that in public. You cannot coordinate it through institutions that are subject to oversight, FOIA requests, or election cycles. You need a space that is private by design, exclusive by structure, and invisible by convention. The Council on Foreign Relations. Founded in 1921, every Secretary of State from 1953 to 2001 was a documented member. Annual report lists membership. Cross-partisan, business, finance, media, government, authority. A private club that coordinates positions before they become public policy. The Trilateral Commission. Founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller. Their own 1975 report the year this plan was written is titled The Crisis of Democracy. Their own conclusion, in their own words, democracy has become ungovernable. It requires management, not a theory about them. Their own report. Their own words. Published. Available. The World Economic Forum. Annual meeting at Davos. Heads of state. Central bank governors. Technology. Executives. Media owners. No press in key sessions. $600,000 per year for access as a strategic partner. The plan said, build a club that oversees the politicians. Multiple clubs were built. Their membership lists are documented. Their meeting records exist. They coordinate openly and rely on the fact that most people will not connect the dots across all of them simultaneously. 2026, the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders Program has produced heads of state in dozens of countries simultaneously. The same individuals appear across multiple organizations on this list. The coordination infrastructure is not hidden. It is public. It relies on the assumption that you won't look at all of it at once. Step 8. Check.